Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to visit with you a little bit about the major storm that happened in Nebraska. I want to thank Dr. Boehm for setting the stage for the few minutes that I have to share with you some of my thoughts and tell a little bit of the story about what has happened with this historic bomb cyclone event. Over 75% of the state of Nebraska, the counties in the state of Nebraska, were affected by this weather, this historic weather event. Almost every stream and river basin in the state of Nebraska was affected as well. And one of the challenges that all of us have had in talking about what's happened in Nebraska really does relate to how unusual this storm was, because we're not used to having storms that cover this much of the state at one time. While we may have a blizzard every year or two or from time to time throughout the winter, and while we might have flooding in a basin or two each year or maybe every few years, we've never really had a circumstance where this much of the state has been affected by essentially one weather system of both snow and rain. And so that's been a challenge to explain that to counterparts around the country, to my counterparts around the country, and to media. I've done over 100 interviews talking about the storm and the effects of the storm and what we're doing to deal with the storm. About $1.4 billion of damage connected to the storm. $400 to $500 million of crop-related damage. This would be land that won't get planted this year, or maybe won't get planted for a couple years. Late planting, all of those things related to crop production. Again, another $400 million or so related to livestock losses, and that would be direct losses, animal death, but also losses with poor feed conversion, those kinds of things that take it longer to bring livestock to the market. And then about another similar number, $400 to $500 million of damage to state infrastructure. So that would be bridges, roads that have either been destroyed, compromised in some way, and will need to be rebuilt. Those numbers, if those estimates, and those are estimates, if they are correct, do not include other losses to infrastructure like to the railroads, which Dr. Boehm talked about. It does not include the cost of clearing land. So if you have sand, and in some cases there's sand and sediment washed up from the streams into farm fields that are in the 1 to 5 feet deep range, those numbers do not include those costs. They also do not include the cost of farm buildings, those kinds of infrastructure equipment that have been lost as well. And then finally, they don't include the losses of the indirect losses of feed, the fact that since farmers weren't able to, or their supply of feed was compromised, that they've had to use summer pastures sometimes, move cattle there earlier, and so those calculations are not part of that. So that kind of lays out some of the total financial costs or piece that goes with this. I want to do a video now that shows one of the places that was hurt the most by this storm.
And I said, we got to go now.
We just run. We had so many things that we needed to do, but you just run. That's all you could do is run away.
With little warning early Thursday morning, Willard Rosichka and his family did all they could to try to save their cattle and farm equipment before outrunning an 11-foot wall of water filled with massive ice chunks barreling down on them after a dam on the Niobrara River broke nearly 30 miles away. But even with the help of friends and neighbors, the Rosichkas couldn't save everything.
I got to the top of the hill over there, and I turned around and looked back, and it looked like an ocean down here. I mean, it looked like an ocean. And I sat there on the hill looking at it, and I just started bawling. I looked at Mom and I said, Mom, our house has water up to the eaves.
Willard's son and fifth-generation farmer Anthony barely recognizes the farm he grew up on. Pipe fencing he built with his own hands, now mangled. Barns and sheds that held a lifetime supply of tools demolished. Their 100-year-old house miraculously still stands, but is unlivable.
The kitchen is on this corner, and that took the brunt of the initial hit, and it busted out the window, and it was half full of ice, mind you. I'd never seen anything like it in my life.
In the midst of calving season, Anthony was looking forward to caring for calves in his new barn he spent the previous year building.
Still have ear tags that didn't even use. That alarm clock.
Instead, he is left to rely on neighbors to watch over his cattle herd that he could save while he cleans up the devastation.
Our cow herd is so messed up right now that I couldn't even tell you what we lost and what we haven't lost. I couldn't even tell you what has calves or what don't have calves. And for me, I can show you my calving book. I keep track of everything.
In addition to their barns, sheds, and equipment being swept away, the Rosichkas lost all their bulls and several cows and calves. A heartbreaking loss for a family who cares so deeply for their animals and the land they love.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
But what they didn't lose is each other.
That's our 25th wedding anniversary, ain't it?
In the days following the tragedy, friends, neighbors, and volunteers arrived on the Rosichka farm ready to help. They're finding tools and equipment that can hopefully be salvaged, and personal mementos that were thought to be gone.
Thank you to everyone involved in helping. I don't know how to thank everybody. I just want to give everybody a big hug. There's no handshakes anymore, it's hugs.
It will take days, weeks, months, maybe even longer to recover. But walking away is something the Rosichkas aren't ready to do.
You want to quit, but I'm not going to quit. I am not going to quit. I'm not going to quit. We weren't fancy people. We're not rich people. We're just ordinary people. We liked it out here, and that's just the way it is, and I'm not giving up.
Okay, so that, excuse me, that you know, the Rosichka family had lived on this place for almost 120 years. They had never been flooded before. They'd had a little water, but nothing like this. And I've seen a picture of their place before the storm hit. It was an immaculate location with everything in its place. So it's really hard to comprehend what the storm has done. Unfortunately, they're not the only ones. This is repeated many, many times across the state of Nebraska and along many river basins. And so, as I talked about before, there's a huge financial toll, but you can also see that there's a significant personal toll as well. So, the storm began to hit Nebraska, as Dr. Boehm talked about, on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the Nebraska Farm Bureau did a conference call among our team with our regional managers that we have around the state to talk about what we needed to do to deal with the disaster. By Friday, we had updated our website with 3 major areas. First, we had as much information as we could provide, where you can go to get help, those kinds of things. And we've added to that since the time of the storm. The second thing that we had there was an exchange portal. So people that had needs could go on, list their needs. People that wanted to help meet those needs could go onto the website and list the needs that they had. The idea was that people would work together to meet the needs that were out there, but we monitored that constantly to help make sure that people's needs were being met. The third thing that we started was a disaster relief portion where people could donate to a fund for farmers, ranchers, and people living in small rural communities. And then within that, a place that people that had that needed financial assistance could click on. Very simple form, just list your name, what you need, and we would work to make sure that we would get you some help. We've been extraordinarily fortunate to raise a considerable amount of money through that fund, and so we've been from the very beginning pushing money out the door. At the beginning, of course, we were working to meet immediate needs. As you're well aware, the Red Cross, other organizations like that tend to go to the more populated areas first. That makes sense. I understand that. But people in rural areas are just as thirsty when they don't have water as people in urban areas. And so our approach was to worked from the rural areas to help farmers and ranchers like Willard and his family who needed lots and lots of things, food and water. We also worked from the very beginning to make sure that feed was available, water for livestock, medications for livestock, and we began also immediately to work with lots of other people to help coordinate efforts, and so we worked with NEMA, FEMA, Nebraska Department of Agriculture, and the University of Nebraska to make sure that the response became more organized. Just to close then, as we move forward here, of course there continues to be a lot of need, and we know that there are some federal programs available to help people in different ways, but it a lot of times takes a while for those to happen. So what we're doing with the Nebraska Farm Bureau Fund is to continue to help people with immediate needs and intermediate needs as they transition through the losses that have occurred. I think that in the video they talked about maybe taking months to recover from this. We're looking at years in many cases to recover from a storm like this, both financially and from a physical perspective, to remove sand from land, those kinds of things that certainly take time and are very, very expensive. So to close, thank you for the opportunity to talk about what's happened here in Nebraska and to share with you a little bit of the story. Thanks to everyone who has helped in some way or who will help in some way. It's very important, as you can see, and we look forward again to being able to help as many people as we can. So thank you very much.